Hello, I'm here today on behalf of Pension Web, Trustee Web, Local Authority Pension Web, to interview Nigel Waterson, Shadow Pensions Minister. So Nigel, 2012 isn't very far away in pension scheme terms, and it promises a new era of state and private pension provision. There's an election in between, however. Isn't pensions likely to become part of that battleground?
Well, of course, 2012, the government of the day will be trying to deliver two huge projects, the Olympics and also personal accounts. As it happens, the last possible date for the election in 2010 is around the time that Tim Jones and his team at PADA would be expecting to sign contracts with their providers. So if that is when the election is indeed happening, and if we were to win it, then obviously we would immediately want to do a quick review of just where PADA have got to and just see how the design of personal accounts has got by then.
Last month, Nigel, you were quoted in the FT as warning that the introduction of personal accounts could well become a mis-selling scandal of epic proportions. Isn't that evidence that there's a rift already between yourselves and the present government on future policy? Certainly on state benefits, means testing and so forth.
Well, we've done our best to stick with a consensus with this government on pension reform, but it's not always been easy, and we were sorely tested a few weeks ago when the government published the results of this exercise that we'd all been involved in, looking at the effects of means-tested benefits on personal accounts and the groups of people who might be worse off or no better off by being auto-enrolled because of their likelihood of claiming means-tested benefits. Unfortunately, the government tried to spin their way out of the problem by kind of suggesting that most people will be better off. But I think one has to look a little more closely at what better off really means. And if it means people just getting their own contributions back, I mean, that's really not good enough. So we were disappointed by that. And for us, it's still an issue. One that's got to be resolved, otherwise means-tested benefits could undermine the whole success of personal accounts. I think this government wants the problem just to go away, but for us it's, as they say, the elephant in the room.
Yes, well, it's not going to go away. So what are your real views as a party on compulsion? And that's an integral part of personal accounts.
Well, we've never favoured compulsion. We don't think it's the right thing to do. It's not a very conservative thing to do, to force people to do things. And people certainly would be angry if the government of the day forced them into something which wasn't in their best financial interests. What we have long believed in is what some people call soft compulsion, using inertia, or auto-enrollment as it's called. Because the sad truth is most people don't give a lot of thought to their retirement and how they're going to pay for it. But if they're automatically enrolled into pension saving, then for a large number of people that would be a good thing and in their interests, but of course not for everybody.
No, indeed. Increasing amounts of government funding are being given to DWP, FSA, etc. We've got Waterson off doing a pilot somewhere in order to procure financial education for the masses, and one can see the timing with 2012 coming up. But governments of any colour have a history of assuming one size fits all. How would a Conservative government seek to break that mould if it was elected?
Well, Waterson has done a very good job trying to look at the issue of what used to be called generic advice. I mean, the problem is with personal accounts that nobody is queuing up to offer to give specific advice. You know, not employers, not the government in waiting, because people are obviously concerned about liability for doing that. But actually giving specific advice to the people with perhaps low-paid work who possibly have high credit card bills or whatever is precisely the way of avoiding people being auto-enrolled who shouldn't actually, who should be opting out. So we'll have to see where that gets to in terms of how it's organised. But of course, for many people, if it's a website or a leaflet or something, I mean, it's going to wash straight over them. And I think one of the things that has emerged over the last few years as we've looked at the Turner report and the whole issue of pensions reform is just the parlous level of financial literacy in this country, particularly when it comes to pensions. So anything we can do to encourage that in the long term must be a good thing. But equally, what we don't want to end up with is people out of sheer ignorance allowing themselves to be auto-enrolled when it's not in their best interests, or opting out when actually they should be opting in.
Isn't it a case that we have perhaps an over-regulated financial services industry. We certainly have an under-regulated banking industry, but that's not for a subject for today. And wouldn't you be better off looking at the degree of over-regulation as it affects the man in the street as a way forward out of this?
Well, I don't think deregulation in terms of the information people get about pensions is really an option at the moment. What I think is important is deregulating the way pensions are run so that it's not so expensive and difficult for a sponsoring employer to continue with a DB, a defined benefit scheme. That's one area where I think deregulation matters. But it is important, if people are giving advice, that it should be sound advice and that there should be some responsibility if it turns out to be the wrong advice. That's why I get hot under the collar when ministers go around saying if you put £1 in, you'll get £2 back. I mean, that's complete nonsense. And if they were any kind of financial institution, they would have their collar felt by the FSA.
Nigel, let me pick up on a point you referred to, defined benefit schemes. They seem to be on their last legs, so maybe we're in the stable door mode. But is it possible, do you think, for a Conservative government, if elected, to do something to rescue what defined benefit schemes we still have in the private sector?
We have every intention, I have every intention, if I am given the chance, to throw a lifeline to DB schemes. I think this government has given up on them, as have some other people, but we know that they are still the Rolls-Royce of pension provision. And of course, one of the problems with personal accounts, even if it succeeds in its aspirations, with an 8% overall contribution level, it isn't necessarily going to deliver a particularly comfortable retirement. Whereas we know typically in existing DB schemes that are still open, an employer contribution can be 15–16%, so a much, much bigger contribution. So we're looking at ways of deregulating, making it less expensive and less bureaucratic for sponsoring employers. We're looking at making it more attractive in terms of, as I say, deregulation. We're looking at any way we can, really, to make it more attractive for employers to stay in the DB business. But at the moment, there's precious little attraction because they can just see an escalating liability year after year after year, which is very daunting when you look at all the other pressures on them at the moment.
Could you be more specific on measures to help DB then, Nigel?
Well, one of the things that we're looking at very closely, something the ABI in particular have raised, is whether we should bring forward the date for auto-enrolment rather than waiting for personal accounts to be delivered. Because we all get very excited about the precise design, the precise architecture of personal accounts, but actually the real prize in all this would be to auto-enroll people into existing, more generous schemes. And we're looking at the mechanics of actually allowing auto-enrolment into those existing schemes on a voluntary basis for particular employers, say in 2010 or 2011, and that would give a huge boost to people's pension savings, huge boost to existing DB schemes, and something again we think the government have just lightly and immediately dismissed, and I think it's an idea worth looking at.
Well, that would of course increase costs, increase membership to more expensive schemes, increase costs, and I wonder how many group finance directors might go with that. What they might be interested in, of course, is an opportunity that seems to me as perhaps an open goal. Gordon Brown took away the ACT relief on dividends for pension funds, so he cut a major source of their income at a stroke. Isn't that an area that you might be keen to make a pledge on ahead of the election? It would certainly be an area that could do a lot of good, because even though the exposure of pension schemes to equities is less than it might have been when it was taken away, putting it back is something that would, at a stroke, be a popular thing to do. It would certainly be as popular as pledging to increase the threshold for inheritance tax to £1 million, which is something that Conservatives have already done.
We certainly do know that change of policy by the government, by Gordon Brown, almost immediately on taking office, has made a huge difference to pension funds, taken about 100 billion out of pension funds at least. We've got no current proposal to restore that cut, but we are constantly looking at ways with our colleagues, my colleagues on the Treasury team, as to how we can restore some sort of level of funding equivalent to that into pension schemes. But it is quite challenging, and of course money is going to be extremely tight if we do win the next election, well, whoever wins the next election. But it's certainly done huge damage to pension schemes. And of course at the time Gordon Brown thought he could get away with it unnoticed and was hailed as a genius when there were these huge surpluses in pension schemes, but that didn't last very long.
No, indeed. Another thing that is a bone of a contention with many pension funds is the Pension Protection Fund. Yes, it's very laudable that we have a lifeboat to protect the unfortunate, but aren't we in a situation now where it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that the stronger pension funds will get stronger, and the weaker pension funds who can't afford to pay their levies will tip into the PPF, and the queue will form and will get longer because of the recession, and then where are we going to be? So what are your views on that?
Well, I know more and more people are becoming concerned about certainly the medium-term future of the PPF. Indeed, we debated this only the other day here in the House of Commons. Certainly, as the PPF takes on more and more schemes like Lehman Brothers, Nortel and others, the burdens on it are increasing all the time. Yes, they say that they can pay out benefits for 20, 25 years on the basis of what they have at the moment, but of course, if you're a deferred pensioner looking some years ahead, that's not quite good enough. So I think we do need to have a care as to the long-term viability of the PPF. Of course, when the government set it up, following the model of the PBGC in the States, they made a point of saying it wasn't guaranteed by the government. And we've said that that's something they should look at again, because there are only three options. One is for the government to guarantee it, another is to reduce benefits, which I think should be the last option to look at, and the other issue is to put up the levy. But of course industry is already complaining about the size of the levy, even though it's been capped for a 3-year period, and I hope that cap can continue until we're out of the current economic difficulties. Because ultimately there's a danger of killing the golden goose, yes, as you were saying, because if you could end up with fewer and fewer DB schemes paying more and more money to really bail out the ones who have taken risky decisions in terms of investment and so on. So I think there is a real worry there. And of course, if we're not careful, it's an additional pressure on those employers who would like to continue with their DB scheme, but are finding all these reasons to stop. And which is precisely why we should come back to the whole issue of levelling down, as it's called, that, you know, whether there are some employers who've struggled on, but eventually will use the advent of personal accounts as the final moment to close their scheme and point their employees in the direction of this government-sponsored scheme, albeit with a relatively low level of contribution.
Good. Well, Nigel, thank you very much. It's very good of you to take time out from your busy schedule to talk to us. Nigel Waterson, Shadow Pensions Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you.